of his party. In fact, he does everything on his own. And he gives orders on his own responsibility and will endure no contradiction. All this, however, concerns only his secret activity and the secret sections. At public meetings with the party, he is, on the contrary, the most liberal and the most popular of them all.
It is known that great men come from log cabins. Likewise, great events begin in commonplace buildings. Over this Soho pub, the German Workers' Education Association met, pioneers in the idea of world revolution. From here on to the Kremlin and the Great Hall of the People. In time, the Marx family got away from their squalid quarters. In 1856, a small inheritance from Germany allowed of escape, as Jenny Marx wrote, from the evil, frightful rooms which encompassed all our joy and all our pain. They moved to a suburban villa in Hampstead, then a brand new real estate development. There were more financial crises, but the worst was over. In later years, Marx had a wholly adequate income by the standards of the time. In the 3 decades that he lived in England, he had something more important even than income. Although income is not a negligible thing for those who do not have it, he had nearly complete security in thought and expression. This was something that the governments under which Marx had previously lived had some difficulty in appreciating. In 1850, the Austrian ambassador protested to the British government that Marx and his fellow members of the Communist League were engaging in all kinds of dangerous discussions, including even the wisdom or unwisdom of regicide. He received a wonderfully insouciant reply.
Under our laws, mere discussion of regicide, so long as it does not concern the Queen of England, so long as there is no definite plan, does not constitute sufficient grounds for the arrest of the conspirators.
As a conciliatory gesture, the British Home Secretary did say he was prepared to assist the revolutionaries financially in emigrating to the United States. Again, Marx didn't go. In London, he had another great resource, one that has been much celebrated. That was the library of the British Museum. It was in the British Museum that Marx wrote his enduring testament, Capital, Das Kapital. To summarize the central thesis of Capital must seem presumptuous. Yet if one gives only conclusions, not supporting argument, it is not impossible. Ricardo, as I hope some will recall, gave the world the labor theory of value, the proposition that the value of a product is based on the value of the labor needed to make it. Further, said Ricardo, there would be an ineluctable tendency for wages to fall to the lowest level necessary to sustain life. Landlords would do well, but workers would only just survive. Where Ricardo left off, Marx began. For Marx, the value that labor gave a product became a right, a thing to which labor was entitled. What labor did not get was what Marx called surplus value. This surplus value, profit more or less, was available to the capitalist for investment in plant and machinery as industrial capital. The capitalist was now the beneficiary, not the landlord. But Ricardo's iron law of wages still applied. Capitalists prospered, workers lived at subsistence level. Wages were kept down by unemployment. The unemployed were an industrial reserve army, always awaiting jobs, always keeping down wages. If the capitalist should reemploy all this labor, wages would rise. Profits would then fall, production would cease to be worthwhile, there would be a crisis, later called a depression. Then the unemployment that workable capitalism required, in Marx's view, would be restored. The profits of the capitalist would be used for investment, also by the large capitalists to gobble up the small ones, the process of capitalist concentration. In consequence of this concentration, individual capitalists would grow bigger and stronger, but the system as a whole, since its political base rested on ever smaller numbers, would become weaker. This weakness, in combination with a falling rate of profit and the increasingly severe depressions, would make the system progressively more vulnerable to overthrow. Confronted by the disciplined proletariat it created, it would be overthrown.
Along with the constantly diminishing number of magnates of capital, who usurp and monopolize all advantages of this process of transformation, grows the mass of misery, oppression, slavery, degradation, exploitation. But with this too grows the revolt of the working class, a class always increasing in numbers, and disciplined, united, organized by the very mechanism of the process of capitalist production itself. The monopoly of capital becomes a fetter upon the mode of production which has sprung up and flourished along with and under it. Centralization of the means of production and socialization of labor at last reach a point where they become incompatible with their capitalist integument. This integument is burst asunder. The knell of capitalist private property sounds. The expropriators are expropriated.
You see the carbuncles on Marx's face. He once warned the capitalists that they would suffer for them. There was for capitalists one comfort. Their end would come not with a whimper, but with a wonderful bang. The first volume of Capital was not published until 1867, and the second two volumes were not published in Marx's lifetime. They were completed from notes by the ever-faithful Engels, could have been completed by no one else. One reason for the delay was the early poverty and struggle. Another was scholarship. Marx was incapable of writing anything until he had read everything. Another reason was the endless swirl of discussion and debate and polemic in which Marx lived. In these years also, Marx was laying the foundations for the revolution which he hoped, but never quite believed, was imminent. His instrument was an organization that would link together the workers of the industrial countries, those proletarians who, as Marx powerfully averred, knew no motherland. Now known as the First International, this revolutionary instrument was born in London on September 28, 1864, at a meeting attended by some 2,000 workers, trade unionists, and assorted intellectuals from all over Europe. A council was selected to which Marx became the secretary. The resolutions that were actually passed by the International, calling for limitations on working hours, state support for education, nationalization of railways, were not very revolutionary. Reform was again the nemesis of revolution. And revolution had another nemesis, and that was nationalism. In 1870, Bismarck, who had once made overtures to Marx to put his pen at the service of his fatherland, went to war with Napoleon III. In a prelude to the vastly greater drama of August 1914, the proletarians of the two countries rallied to the defense, as they saw it, of their homelands. The Franco-Prussian War and the siege of Paris were reported with much of the avidity with which modern disasters are enjoyed. The New York papers were very much interested. On March 1st, 1871, the German army made its triumphal march down the Champs-Élysées. Outrage at the incompetence of the old rulers, knowledge that the wealthy had departed Paris, offended pride, memory of the recent hunger and hardship, all combined again to bring revolt. It started here on the heights of Montmartre. The troops of the Republic sought to secure the guns that rightly they did not trust in the hands of the Parisians.